Today I'm talking to Paul Bevan. Paul is the CEO and founder of Magic Valley. Magic Valley is a cultivated meat startup that's focused on transforming how we produce and consume meat. What they do is that by using an innovative technology, they create real meat that is more sustainable and ethical than traditional farming. We're going to hear all about the technology that they use and how that works. Paul is a passionate leader and he has a proven track record. He's committed to building strong relationships with teams, partners, and investors. And this really comes through in the interview that he's a team player and he's really good at working with people. You can see that. He's deeply dedicated to sustainability and animal welfare, and he's aiming to make a meaningful impact on the food system. And this is something that's really driving what they're doing there at Magic Valley. Paul's eager to connect with others in the space all the time, so we'll be leaving his contact information on the site, but you can also reach him at paul@magicvalley.com.au, and their website is magicvalley.com.au. Check them out. They've got a podcast as well. They've got a bunch of sessions on there, even some tastings, and it's really cool to see. So I hope you enjoy this session. Great. So today I have Paul Bevan. Paul is the CEO and founder of Magic Valley. It's a company in Australia doing cultivated meat. We've talked to a few companies doing this type of thing in the past, but we're always interested to hear what's going on. And so, Paul, welcome.
Great to chat to you today, Daniel.
Great. Thanks for being here. So, why don't we just start out with a little bit about your background, how you got into doing this, how Magic Valley became your project, and then we'd love to hear more about your technology and what you think of the industry and so forth. So what about you? What about you? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So there's probably no straight lines into the cultivated meat industry, and mine is certainly not that. So previously, I worked in analytics at the banks in a corporate career for 7 or 8 years. Left that to found a mixed martial arts gym. Sold out of that business, developed a online finance brokerage. But at that point, I was really looking at, well, what am I actually interested in from a personal standpoint? And so I was vegetarian or went vegetarian over a number of years in my late teens and have been vegan for the last 10 years now. And really that is sort of where my passion lies. It's around animal rights and activism. And I got heavily involved in that space probably 7 or 8 years ago when I had my businesses. And so was really looking to put, my energy and resources into having the biggest impact that I could have for animals. And as I said, got involved in a fair bit of activism. I got involved in politics, looking at law reform, around animal rights, how we treat animals and how they're protected. And obviously, intensive animal agriculture as well, where we use animals mostly, in the food supply chain, obviously for other products as well, but mostly in the food supply chain. And so when I was doing a lot of outreach and talking to people around the impacts of intensive animal agriculture, the benefits of a plant-based diet, the impacts on the planet and sustainability, what I came to quickly realize was that most people weren't interested in a slightly better veggie burger. They wanted to continue to eat meat, and that became really apparent. Despite me providing them with all these facts and information and data, food is very emotional. It's very cultural. I myself grew up eating meat, as most of us did, and so came to the conclusion then that I'm like, okay, well, what I'm doing here is really not having an impact. It's not a good use of my time and resources. And so I started looking at the food system. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of people encouraged me to get involved in the plant-based sector. But I just knew from not only just from talking to people, but the research and the psychology quite clearly points out that people do want to keep eating meat. They're not interested in slightly better, substitute products. They just want to keep eating meat. And so around that time, I came across the technology that was being developed internationally and obviously being used within the life sciences and regenerative medicine industry for a number of years around developing or the potential to develop what was called then lab-grown meat or clean meat. We now refer to it as cultivated meat, but developing those products. And so cultivated meat, it's a real meat product. It has the same taste, the same flavor, the same texture, the same mouthfeel. There's no animal cruelty involved, so there's no animal slaughter anywhere. It's a more sustainable meat product, and it's better for the environment. At scale, we'll be able to be produced at the same price or cheaper than traditionally farmed meat. So as far as I was concerned, that became the obvious choice. I'm like, well, why wouldn't someone choose that when they're presented with the exact same product? They don't have to make any behavioral change. We don't have to switch from, eating a burger to eating a plant-based patty or veggie patty or something like that. You've got the same exact product, but it's just involving no animal slaughter, potentially cheaper, potentially healthier for you as well. So for me, I'm like, well, that's the obvious choice. And so I put all of my time and resources into that and started Magic Valley from there. So as I mentioned, I'm not a scientist. I'm on the business side. And so we built the scientific team around us from there, really looking at, what is going to be the way to find the technology that will be able to produce cultivated meat at a price that's affordable for the consumer and can be scaled. So, can reach, mainstream adoption, because that's where the impact is going to come. If we couldn't do those two things, there was no point in doing it.
Yeah, I agree. Before we get into the plant-based, or not plant-based, but the cultivated meat space, which is, I think I agree with you. It's the more interesting element of this industry. How did you go about starting a business in a space which is kind of scientifically relatively complex without that background? I mean, I'm a business person myself, so this always intrigues me when people take, that path. And so what did you do? Did you have partners, or did you find a co-founder? How'd you go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was one of the hardest parts of the journey. So I'd done plenty of, research into the technologies myself, was really invested in the space and looking at investments in the space for, probably 12 or 18 months. So even though my background, is not technical, I feel like I had a fairly good understanding of the science. They still don't let me do anything in the lab, but I feel like my understanding was okay for a non-scientist. But from there, had to find the technical people to be able to come and help me. So I'm actually a solo founder at Magic Valley. But had to spend a lot of time, going to, biotech conferences, going to universities, talking to people, reaching out on LinkedIn, reading papers that have been written by masters and PhD students many, many years ago.
But still, you need
them.
to make a product. Sorry to interrupt you, but like I think it's amazing that, because again, like I get it. Like you can read a lot, like clever people, particularly people that are sort of in the commercial space, you piece together a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, like you need to make something to build a company. So like, what did you, and there are no contractors out there to do this. It's not like there's co-manufacturers making cellular meat, like it's just, they're not there. So it's like fascinating that you did this, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, it was just basically it's a lot of door knocking to find the right people. And it's not just the right people from a skill set perspective, but from a personality and character perspective and everything as well. We ended up doing some work with the National Science Research Agency here in Australia, which is the CSIRO, and developed some contacts there. Professor Andrew Laslett, who's now our head of R&D, was at the CSIRO at the time. He helped me very much with, identifying the right technology to use, the right skill sets that we needed to bring into the company, to build it out. And obviously, developing this sort of product, there's so many different aspects, whether it's, cell biology, bioprocess engineering, manufacturing, food science, nutrition. You're right. The list goes on and on and on. So we just built out from there, and Andrew was instrumental in assisting me, with that. We got along really well, and Andrew's been vegetarian for a long time. Jacob had previously, Dr. Jacob Goodwin, who's our head of innovation now, had previously worked with Andrew at the CSIRO and's got really extensive background, in cell biology and the types of stem cells that we use. And Jacob was keen to come across as well. Interestingly, Jacob's background is he actually grew up on a cattle farm. His family farms cattle, so we come from two very different perspectives.
Yeah.
And backgrounds, which is great because you need that when you're starting out a new venture. It's no good everyone having the same opinions and same experiences. So yeah, and look, we just built from there. And so yeah, look, it went for, like I said, it was a lot of knocking on doors and getting rejected, and until you could find the right people. And yeah, we've just taken off from there. And that's we started in 2020, so yeah, it's sort of 4 years ago now.
Yeah, it's been a while, and you have raised some funding to do this as well, and how's that gone?
Yeah, so we raised a pre-seed round back in 2021, and we've been pretty capital efficient with our business. We haven't raised vast tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that the other companies in the space have. We've been running on a pretty lean program in terms of our team and our resources and equipment, and beg borrowing, and I won't say stealing, but using secondhand equipment, and just doing what we can. It's that was one of the other most challenging things. Starting a biotech company. Most of the equipment and infrastructure is housed within universities and university settings, and it's very difficult to get access to that. And so that was another challenge in terms of getting started. Once we had the team, well, then we needed to find some space and some equipment. So as you said, we raised some funding back then, and we're actually in the process of raising a seed round at the moment to enable us to scale up and commercialize what we've built so far.
Okay, cool. So thanks for the background. We definitely want to talk about scale up, because I think that's where the whole industry's at right now. But maybe you can give us a little bit of background. I think a lot of people who might listen to this are familiar with the sum of the technologies that are out there, but there's a couple of big names in the industry, or bigger names that we hear about in the news a lot. A lot of them are based in the U.S. Obviously, California, it's not too far away from Australia, just an ocean, right? But what's the environment like there in Australia? I mean, it's but presume that you're trying to produce for that market first. If not, let us know. But it's I mean, obviously there's a different culture, different investor space. Like, so what have you found it to be like there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. As I said, we raised that pre-seed round a few years ago, and most of the interest then came from overseas. There was a lot more interest and awareness around cultivated meats internationally back then than there is or was in Australia. But that shifted. This time around, there's a lot more awareness in Australia, particularly the last 2 years, and that probably sort of coincides with approvals of products from some of those other companies, in Singapore, in the US, and just that general awareness. And not just the awareness, I think the actual need for cultivated meat, or for a change to the food system, at least, particularly since COVID as well. So that's sort of changed a lot domestically. You're right. We're looking at Australia first. Our first product's going to be a cultivated lamb product. Australia is very well known for its lamb and sheep species or breeds. Obviously for our food safety and security as well. And lamb for us makes a lot of sense from a commercial standpoint as well, in terms of price point, and also a real I'll say a lack of competition in that space. Most of the other companies are focusing on, as we've seen with the approved products, chicken, beef, which is probably just a larger impact in terms of the environment and sustainability, and pork as well. So lamb for us, looking locally first. Our food regulator covers both Australia and New Zealand, which is a little bit of a quirk in the system. So we'll be looking to produce domestically first, and then looking at international expansion following that.
Cool. Well, I think Australia's probably a pretty big meat market anyway, even though it's there's a lot of meat. I think the times that I've been there, it's a big part of the culture. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that from a kind of an ethical and sustainability and cultural perspective, what you have found the reception of potential consumers to be. And the other thing is, I think that we talk a lot about the beef industry, right? And its impact on the environment and the cows. But there's not as much that people mention about things like chicken or lamb like yourselves. So maybe you can, give us a little bit of background on the sustainability argument around those species of animals. Right?
Yeah, from a sustainability, or I guess it's a little bit more so from an emissions perspective. Yeah, beef obviously, a reduction in beef farming or cattle farming would have the largest impact from an environmental perspective. Sheep, I think, is second,
But
actually,
is that just
on
because
that
the
list.
numbers? So sorry to interrupt you. Is that just because the numbers of cows raised is so much higher, or is it on a per kilogram of protein basis? How do they measure that? Like which animal is more impactful? Is that known?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's a combination of both. So obviously,
Okay.
just the vast volume
Yeah.
and quantity,
Yeah.
but also I think in relation to the methane that's produced as well. So which is
Okay.
different between the species.
Mm,
Obviously, pork and chicken is much lower down on that list. But in terms of like numbers, if we're talking about numbers, well, chicken is in the 80. We slaughter 80 billion chickens per annum, which is far in excess of the animals from any other species,
mm,
except for the aquatic species though. So we don't have exact numbers on the aquatic species, but the number of aquatic animals that we slaughter or kill in
mm.
that process is estimated to be in the hundreds of billions, which is even more in excess of chicken. But which is a real area of interest to us from an environmental perspective as well, in terms of the oceans and the health of the oceans, and farming that we do in the oceans, overfishing, etc.
Mm.
But yeah, no, definitely from the environmental perspective, there's a lot of people focusing on beef, and I guess when it comes to Australia, as I said, just the awareness has changed over the past probably 3 years. And what when I was speaking to people, 4 or 5 years ago, and I would say, lab grown meat or clean meat, no one had any idea what I was talking about. One in 100 people would be like, oh yeah, I think I read something about that.
Mhm.
Now, not just my conversations, but from the research that we've done, more than half of people have heard about it now. They have an understanding of what cultivated meat is.
Mhm.
And in terms of acceptance, again, we've seen a pretty large shift there as well. I think with any new technology, and food is no different, younger generations are more open to change and adopting technology. And so we've seen a skew there to the younger demographics. Much more likely to adopt, try, purchase, and incorporate it into their diet.
Mhm.
A little less so in the older generations, my age and above. There's a bit more hesitation or reticence to get involved in cultivated meat or try
Yeah,
something new.
I think I'm probably there with you. I mean, I don't eat that much meat. I'm happy to reduce my meat consumption, but I have a young child, and it's amazing to watch children's just acceptance. And you can see that this generation, for them, it's going to be normal to consume some of these products, and for the next generation, it will be very normal for them to consume that. But that takes, a 30-year turn to kind of birth two generations or of people. So
Sure.
yeah, I agree with you. That's an interesting observation.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
in terms of the actual, I guess more so labels of people, we've seen the most likely early adopters are the flexitarians, and so
Yeah.
that's people that eat meat, incorporate meat in their diet, maybe looking to reduce it or incorporate
Right.
alternatives, whether they're plant based. But we know that they've got a real obviously people can be flexitarian for a number of reasons, but there's obviously people that are concerned around sustainability in the environment, potentially some health concerns or ethical concerns around where their food comes from, and we think that they would definitely be the earliest adopters. But our target is to get to all the hardcore meat eaters over
Yeah.
time.
Of course, yeah, but I think this is a great entrepreneurial story, this whole industry, because it really is one of those things about direction and versus timing. Like how do you manage through obviously the time scale of this adoption, and correctly manage your technology investment and development and things like that. I think it's very interesting evolution to watch. I'm fascinated by it. So maybe we talk about the technology a bit. So what do you do? How do you do it? You mentioned that you spent a lot of time choosing which one to focus on. How'd you make those choices? Maybe what's different a little bit about what others that are out there in the market that were the first movers doing, and how are you navigating that part of it?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny because when we were first getting started, all the companies talked to each other, and we knew what everyone was doing and knew what technology everyone was using. And then a whole lot of money, venture capital and investment came into the space, and people don't talk about it so much anymore. But from what we understand, and I can't sort of comment on what other companies are doing today, but because I just don't see all of that. But from those original, cultivated meats probably, or the concept has been around for about 10 years now. Mark Poster at Moser Meat, I think, sort of fairly famously created that first lab-grown beef burger, which cost hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars, and they could sort of at that time only sort of manage to do that in the lab. It wasn't scalable and wasn't be able to be produced because it was expensive, and there's limitations in the technology. So the technology that we use, well, basically, I'll explain the process first of all. So we take a sample of skin cells from a living animal. That animal goes on to continue living its normal natural life. We're then able to take those skin cells into the lab, reprogram them into stem cells, and then induce them to become a particular type of stem cell. And that's called, for us, the technology that we're using, a pluripotent stem cell. Now, that stem cell is important because it can become any cell or tissue type in the body. So we can direct it to become muscle, fat, bone, connective tissue, blood, organs, whatever we want, and whatever we want to have in that final product. And those cells will also proliferate indefinitely. So they don't have to have any genetic modification or anything done to those cells to keep them growing. They will just continue to grow, so they will proliferate indefinitely. And they multiply much more quickly, and they produce more mass than the other stem cell types that some of the other companies have used, or the older companies have used. And our cells will also grow in suspension as well. So that means they don't have to attach to a surface like a scaffold for them to grow. They basically attach to themselves and form aggregates or spheroids and grow in suspension. So that eliminates a costly and tricky, I guess, part of the process, having to get your cells to grow on something. And so basically those cells will be contained in what's called a bioreactor, which is really just a large glass or stainless steel vessel with an impeller in it that spins around. You've got inputs going in and outputs coming out. So things like, we're adding glucose, amino acids, growth factors, basically what would happen inside the animal's body normally in terms of the biology. That'll run for a certain number of days. At the end of that cycle, we basically harvest the cells out of those containers, combine them together, literally put them through a mincer, as you would put meat through a mincer today at a butcher shop, and creating mincemeat or ground meat products from the cells that we've grown up. And so that's the process, and that's the type of technology that we use.
Okay. Why the skin cell? Why? I was expecting that you would say a muscle tissue cell. I mean, of course, as you say, you can direct them, but why skin cell?
There's a couple of reasons. It's just the most non-invasive cells to collect from the animal. We want to minimize, harm to the animal as much as possible, and so that's a fairly, painless, pain-free way to obtain the cells. And it's also what we're doing is, as I said, reprogramming them into stem cells. So if we were to take a muscle biopsy, for example, and this is what some of the other companies have done, or the older way of doing things, you take that muscle sample, which is fairly invasive to get a muscle biopsy. I bet it's not very pleasant.
Yeah.
No, exactly. But those cells, you can only grow them up into muscle. Okay,
Yeah.
so you would have to then obtain a fat sample to grow up into fat. Then you've got multiple cell banks, starter cells that you're trying to grow, and those cells are also got a limited lifespan. So biologically, they're limited to it's around 50 doublings. And after that time, so those cells will die out and not grow anymore. So you would have to either go back to the animal and take more biopsies to grow them up, or try and make some modification to those cells to get them to grow, keep growing. So potentially would become a GMO. So none of those processes really are scalable processes when you're thinking about trying to grow billions of tons of meat. So that's one of the main reasons why we don't use those stem cell types.
Okay. Then what about the structure of the final product? Have you gotten to that stage in your development? Of course, one of the main concerns around, I mean, meat is a very complex thing. Like maybe if you're making a burger, which is ground meat, it's easier to mimic these types of fibers and structures and fats and marbling. How have you thought about managing that in your product?
Yeah, so when we got started, and I think probably every company in the space when they got started wanted to create structured products, steaks and chops and fillets and all those sorts of things, which has been done and has been done in the lab, but it's probably at a similar point to that first burger. So it can be done in the lab, but creating those structured products, at scale is just not viable at the moment because of the complexity involved and the cost involved for doing that. So our focus has shifted back for, at least for our initial products, to be those ground meat or mincemeat products, which are unstructured products, which is a lot easier, as you mentioned, to be able to, maintain, the integrity, the mouthfeel, etc. There's some new technologies coming out, particularly around bioreactor types, which is what the cells grow in, to have muscle growing around fat, being able to get the fibers running in the correct direction, and all those sorts of things. But to be able to do that at scale, I just don't think it's possible at the moment. It will be, but that's still going to be a few years away, and that's something that I think most companies will be working on over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Then the question that always comes up for me about these methodologies is biodiversity, right? When I read your website, I thought it was very interesting because you used a turn of phrase where it says like, well, look, the animal can continue to live happily, right? And then we take a small cell from it. It's not very invasive, and then we produce meat from that animal. And you said it yourself, is that you'd have to kind of continually take these biopsies if you were having cells that were dying out over strain. But then the other concern was, or maybe there isn't a concern, is that if you're using like singular cells from a singular animal, I mean, nature has a way of creating strong, healthy cells by, allowing strong, healthy animals and humans to continue to thrive and prosper, but ones that have like genetic issues, from mating or whatnot, don't. And one can imagine that if we're kind of cloning cells outside of the natural reproductive cycle of animals, what happens then to biodiversity of what we're eating? I mean, has the industry thought about this? Like, how do you manage that idea? I mean, of course, having animals living in the field and continuing to reproduce, but just not slaughtering them is potentially one way to do that, right? So.
Yeah, so we do. There's a lot of obviously disease screening and health screening, of the animal before and after taking the sample of cells. And it's not, just to pick up on the point, we're not actually cloning anything, but we're just taking those cells and then growing them and expanding them. But we could do that from, and I'm sure many other companies are doing this throughout the industry, and we get a lot of requests from consumers as well around particular species and particular breeds. And so everyone talks about Wagyu beef, and is it where is it from? Is it from Japan? Is it from what country is it from? Is it real Wagyu? And all those sorts of things. and that could be, and that we could work with those different breeds and species, which have been, as you quite rightly point out, developed over decades, if not hundreds of years, and really be able to focus in on, for want of a better term, the best cow, or the best sheep, or the whatever the species is, to be able to continue to produce the highest quality, I guess, products, whether it comes to the taste or the nutrition, or whatever the case may be. Obviously, if cultivated meat makes up a large proportion of the meat that we consume in the future, we won't be breeding all of those animals into existence. And so, as you've mentioned, there will probably be an adjustment in that area. But if we think about particularly chickens, for example, have been so modified over time. They grow so unnaturally in terms of their body composition, and then how they're treated in terms of how they're farmed in intensive animal agriculture is so far from natural that it's just it couldn't be further away from the natural process. And so hopefully we would see a return to less intensive animal agriculture practices. I still think, as much as I would like to have cultivated meat, make up 100% of the proportion of meat that we consume, I don't think that's realistic. We're still going to, as a population, be eating meat from traditional methods, but hopefully it'll be done in a much more sustainable way than it is today when it comes to, intensive animal agriculture, and just the consequences of that on the environment, on the health of the animals, and the surrounding surrounding environmental impacts that occur as well.
Yeah, you're right. Like, focus on what it used to be like 200 years ago, right? When it wasn't so impactful. And I mean, it still is a healthy part of a diet, right? We're humans, right? Like, we, biologically are adapted to eat meat and some, not a lot of meat, but some meat and some vegetables, I think, to be healthy. And yeah, it would be great to return to that. I think the wealthier part of the world sort of is, right? Because very wealthy people can afford to consume smaller amounts of very high quality meat, but the vast majority of folks can, and that's probably the part of the problem you're trying to solve. What about ethics? I think that, do you think that people are more attuned to the treatment of an animal? I mean, I think this is an interesting thing to think about. Obviously an animal feels pain, right? And all of this, but then one could argue, like, well, we don't have to have so many animals if we don't eat so many animals. And so what's the alternative? Like, I live in Switzerland, so like I ride my bike around a lot. The Swiss, of course, well, not all Swiss, but many Swiss, like, dairy farmers like to make the argument that the Swiss cow is very happy, right? Perhaps it is. I don't know. I mean, they seem to live a pretty, like, nice bucolic life out there in the field. Maybe they're not aware of it. I don't know. But do you think that the broader population is becoming more aware of that? I mean, you see how people treat their house pets, right? Like, they treat them like as humans. I mean, it's not too far away to think that you would also think of other animals in the same way, right? But what have you observed in that part of I'm sure you talk more to consumers about these topics.
Yeah, look, I definitely think people are more aware of that, and it probably, again, it skews to the younger generations who are just take a much more of an interest in the impact of their food choices, whether it's on the ethics involved and the impact on animals, or the overall sustainability of the planet, where they're thinking about not just themselves when they're making those choices when it comes to their food. Look, no doubt, some animals which are farmed differently lead better lives than those animals in intensive animal agriculture, who mostly have horrible lives. And really, when it comes to it, there's really no ethical or humane way to slaughter an animal that doesn't want to die. So they all end up with the same fate. So ethically, developing cultivated meat, if it was a 100% solution, we would remove animals from the production chain. There would be no, ethical or moral concerns when it comes to, ending the life of an animal. And we've really been focused on that from the very beginning, not just in terms of the end product that we're creating, but in terms of the components that we use throughout the process as well. So we don't use any animal components, obviously, aside from the initial sample of skin cells. There's no other animal components used at all in the process. So it's as ethical and as cruelty-free as it can possibly be. And I think a lot of people are really interested in that type of solution, because what we've seen in recent years, in most countries, there's been a real boom in the plant-based industry, or plant-based substitutes industry, where we've seen, a lot of first-time sales of those products, because, they're marketed as being, more ethically produced. Obviously, there's no animal slaughter involved. More sustainable, potentially healthier for you, competing on price, but marketed as having the same taste. So, plant-based chicken tastes like chicken, plant-based pork tastes like pork. Well, in reality, it doesn't. And so consumers have seen that. They've tried the products. They're sold on the sustainability and ethical benefits. They want to experience that, but they still want it to taste like the products that they're familiar with. And that's where the downfall has come. So that gives us great confidence in terms of cultivated meat, that those consumers are there. The consumer is concerned around sustainability and ethics. And so we think that has grown and will continue to grow over the coming years as well. It's definitely been a shift in recent times, and I think some of that might have been brought on by COVID as well, but also just the vast increase in population as well. People are just more aware of their choices.
Yeah, and it's very tiny step changes, of course, that need to take place over time. The population grows, as you say. There's still probably going to be a lot of share of meat consumption, but you've got to make dents where you got to make progress where you can make progress at the end. So then what do you think about like the future of the growth of the, not just the industry we can talk about in general, but like when you go to the grocery store or when you go to a restaurant, where is it that you see that people are going to really start having access and consuming these? I remember back in 2017, 2016, like, yes, there was Beyond Meat and in the Impossible Burger and things that you'd hear about this on the news, but it wasn't around. Now pretty much anywhere you go in Europe, you can find one of these plant-based alternative meat substitutes on like a quick service restaurant menu. Like, you can access them. So what do you think the trajectory for access to these types of products then will be in the broader society and on timeline?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and a lot of it is governed by regulatory approval in the different jurisdictions. And so that's one of the, which is obviously a very important aspect of bringing a new or novel food product into the market. You have to ensure that it's safe, and it doesn't contain any allergens. It has to be tested thoroughly, which we're all for. But it does impact your ability to bring products to market in different geographies. So that's going to slow down, I think, the rollout. Obviously, that process will speed up, over time. It's a new thing. It's something new for the regulators as well. Once they're more comfortable with it and the technology, I think that will speed up over time. So it's somewhat restricted by that. But in terms of being able to bring product to market, to scale that product and to reach the mainstream consumer, as I mentioned, that's been one of our targets from the beginning. So our focus is on developing products that we can sell B2B. We can sell it at wholesale prices. It can go into food service channels. It can go to wholesale manufacturers. It can eventually end up in restaurants through those food service channels. And we will be able to leverage the existing brands and customer relationships and distribution supply, manufacturing and distribution
Mm.
networks of those existing businesses to be able to reach the consumer as quickly as possible and to get into mainstream as quickly as possible. And so one of the benefits of us being able to produce cheaply and to be able to scale those products is getting that adoption. It's not going to be, just high-end restaurants. I know some companies are, focused on niche products and it's high-end restaurants and it's high price point. To me, that is ridiculous because that will have absolutely zero impact. I don't really understand from a commercial perspective, producing small quantities and selling it at higher price points. I don't see how that is viable either, and that's never been our approach. Our approach is to develop products from all the farmed animal species that people are familiar with, they want to eat, they want to continue eating, that we slaughter the most of, develop those products where the demand is, be able to do it at a price point that, we can get into, B2B, a B2B model and sell wholesale, and then reach the consumer where most of the consumers make their purchases. So, whether that's, as you said, at, quick service restaurants, whether that's in school settings, hospital settings, hospitality, events, and obviously in retail, in supermarkets where people will purchase their meat, take it home and cook it themselves. And so that's still as positive as I am about that. That's still going to take some time. In terms of scaling up, but also getting those regulatory approvals in place. I have no doubt that demand will far outstrip supply as we're getting started, and that will only can continue to build. And then hopefully from there, we would like to see government involvement in each country, in each state within each country, to support the development of the industry, whether that's to do with infrastructure, whether that's to do with education, awareness. Obviously, a new industry is creating jobs. You're developing skill sets. There's lots of opportunities there, and so I think that's an important aspect that is being left to all the individual companies at the moment, particularly when it comes to awareness and benefits and all of those sorts of things. And then hopefully that'll shift over time. And the existing industry, the large players in the food space, in the meat processing space, as we've seen internationally, are certainly looking to get involved, and hopefully that will hasten as well, which would be the ideal for getting the products to market as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you just said. I think it's also a fascinating case study in just how industry evolution and innovation happens. If you sort of look at the energy space, like not long ago, people thought that windmills were crazy and all the rest of this, solar doesn't work. And I mean, of course, you still have a lot of naysayers, and now it's really being fought at the governmental level, right? Like you see elections it's a big political point, but that means that it's just at a scale where you're at there is a tipping point, and then you can really start to have regulatory, momentum behind what's going on. I think it's probably similar here. I think the really fascinating part about these types of technologies, though, is they don't require nearly the amount of capital investment, right? So you can have, unlike in the energy industry where you might have like a coal plant, which despite the fact you'd like to get rid of it, you have like a 30-year investment on that. And so you have to run it basically to pay for what you've already put in to build it. Whereas here, as you say, if you work with the existing distribution and supply chain, which I think in the food industry is super difficult to change, like, the way that food service is supplied and grocery stores is supplied, that's just a massive thing to try to redesign. This is not going to happen. So if you can work within that infrastructure, you can inject newer and new technologies. And even if big companies get involved, you still require small, very innovative, agile, research-based institutions and companies to be able to continue to produce what I'm sure will be, very rapidly evolving new ways of doing what you're doing, right? And that's how you basically get rapid change. And eventually then, of course, it becomes a big market and innovation becomes harder because, big organizations with lots more money and things that they just don't innovate as fast. But we're in this very rapidly evolving portion of that cycle, which I think is super, super interesting to watch it play out, right? It's not like car sharing,
Absolutely.
right? It's not overnight, right? Because you have all these adoption problems and frictions in the food industry. But I think it is definitely probably can make this evolution faster than some other industries that require more significant capital investment to build them up, right? Even though I'm sure
Absolutely.
bioreactors, they're expensive. I don't doubt that the bioreactor is expensive, but it's not a coal power plant, right? It's not that kind of investment. It's so you could just change much faster, and then at the same time, smarter and smarter people and more, more and more uh, research goes into it. Universities start programs and they start producing more
Yeah.
graduates that have background in this, and it just goes faster and faster. So kudos to you for being an early mover. I think navigating that early mover process is the key, right? It's like how do you kind of be on that wave when it starts to build, right? And that's I think it's interesting to watch for the next 5 years or so what's going to happen. So,
Absolutely, yeah, couldn't agree more. And yeah, it's
yeah.
certainly it's interesting that you mentioned the bioreactors and what has happened, in that space. And a reactor that cost $3 million probably 4 years ago, you can purchase for about $300,000 now. And so even just the cost curve of that
Yeah.
is coming down rapidly as well. But yeah, it's all new, it's all innovative, and hopefully that that cost reduction curve continues. As you said, we get more resources into the space, whether that's human capital or monetary capital.
Yeah, that's great. And Moore's law basically exists almost everywhere in all of these things. Yeah, I think it's cool to watch those types of things play out, and you really realize that the world is not so random, right? Like it's random in a short term, but it's not random in the long term in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool. Any closing thoughts or last points to share? This has been super fascinating and also interesting to see what's happening at different parts of the world. That's one other thing maybe we didn't talk about is that, this is not just a winner take all type of game. I think, 5 years ago, it felt a little bit like that, like, who's first, who's gonna figure this out first, and then everything will kind of like blow up and no one else will be able to participate. But you definitely see that sometimes being a second or third or even fourth mover is better because you learn so much from the folks that went before you that spent more time, money, and energy learning those first couple of lessons. And I think this is really one of those places where also because it's food, you need to produce and distribute locally because there's transportation costs also involved. So I think, maybe you have some comments about how you view the competitive space in that regard, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I never really understood the winner take all, mentality. And I think a lot of that was driven by, venture capital investors who are, used to other technology types or other industries. I mean, to me, it seemed ridiculous that there was only ever going to be one company that developed all the technology to produce all the food products from all the species everywhere in the world in every location. Like, it just made no sense to me. And so it's just a completely different, model and industry. And as you said, this culturally, food is so different in every country, and even within countries, north, south, east, west. There's no way that anyone could be across all of that, and everyone's using different technologies. As you said, there's so many like transportation and distribution um, um, concerns, I guess, that you have to take into account when you're developing or distributing food products as well. And so there's still, obviously a number of companies across the world working in the space. People are using different technologies, they're developing different products. They're looking at different markets, ways of distributing, and so I think there's room for a lot of players within the space. Food is such a massive industry, like financially as well. Meat in particular is worth billions of dollars in most countries, trillions globally. And so I think there's plenty of room for multiple players within the space and within countries. It's very easy for me to say, well, we just take the cells and we grow it up and we create a product at the end. It's actually not that easy. It's very complex. And so, we need as many people, as you said, brighter minds coming into the industry, coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things, more innovative technologies, and to continue to grow and expand the industry. And we're creating meat products, but there are other companies using what's called precision fermentation to create, dairy products and other types of cellular agriculture products as well. And I think there's plenty of room for those companies as well when we're looking at milk and cheese and eggs and ice cream, all those dairy products, and other products that are bio-based as well when it comes to, leathers and those sorts of things too. So
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's plenty of room for everyone, and hopefully, what I would say to, I guess, people that are listening, or to the consumer, if you have the opportunity to try cultivated meat, wherever you live, just give it a go. Just be open-minded to it. Most people think, oh, it definitely doesn't taste the same. Oh, surely it doesn't. Just be open-minded. Like, give it
Yeah.
a go, because I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah. I think that I would definitely try it if I could. I was in Singapore a year or two ago, but I realized that there are so few of these tastings available, even of that product that was there. But you had I watched you have a podcast as well on your site. You had someone on, and they did a tasting. That I think those are great ideas, like showing that it really happens someplace and that people are really doing it, because it does feel and seem abstract at first, right? To think about, what what it will even look like, right? Like, I think that's also a huge step, is like you look at all the websites and the literature about this. It's abstract, whereas what's going to happen when people start actually seeing, like, hey, look, here's a video on a website of an actual product, right? Like, I mean, even that's a huge step, right? But yeah, it just takes time to get there. But yeah. We're so
Yeah,
impatient
well, it's just
in
not.
our modern world,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, we try and be as transparent as possible, with the process, but also with the tastings that we've held. It's pretty nerve. I mean, we've done a number of tastings. We've also done a number of TV shows as well, where they've been tasting the product, and it's all very nerve wracking. Like, don't get me wrong, it makes me very nervous, but. I think it's important to normalize. It looks like meat. We make you a dumpling, we make you a burger. Nobody can tell the difference, and the feedback is consistently that it tastes just exactly the same. People come into it, and they expect. First thing is, they're like, oh, surely it can't taste the same. But then they also expect it to taste completely different, and when it doesn't, then they're shocked. They're like,
yeah.
this is just exactly the same. I'm like, yeah, it seems a bit boring, but that's exactly how it's meant to be.
Yeah, you're not reproducing nature. And I mean, this is where you have a massive leverage over the plant-based type of product, is that there's so much optimization and tinkering that has to go on there to make it closer. Whereas you at least know what your milestone is. Like, like, okay, that's the standard. And, if I can reproduce what nature is doing in growing these cells, we'll have it. Whereas the other
Yeah.
part is, like, there's so much interaction between all this processing and a plant-based product that I think it's challenging, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so nothing's easy though. Listen, Paul, this has been super interesting. It's great to learn more about this. I look forward to trying one of these products very, very soon, and I'm sure that your company is going to be part of that. Um, Anyway, like, if you, without any closing remarks that you might have, I would say thank you very much, and we'll be following you online and seeing what happens.
Thanks very much, Alan. Appreciate the time. And yeah, if you're ever in Melbourne, let us know. We'll hook you up with the tasting.
Great, awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.